Imagine for a moment you've poured everything into something really meaningful. The real test, the measure of its long-term success.
Yeah.
It isn't actually its current size or resources. It's the strength, the quality, the resilience of the leaders you leave behind.
Yeah.
That's quite a thought, isn't it? Because it gets right to the heart of what we're diving into today, Indigenous leadership development in the church.
Yeah, it's a critical point because every organization, and I mean certainly every church, it eventually faces that moment, when the founders or the key leaders just can't be everywhere anymore. And the urgent question becomes, okay, are new leaders actually ready? Are they ready to step in?
Right.
Or does all that momentum just stall? Maybe even crumble because no one's been properly prepared. This is exactly what our sources call the dangerous dependency trap.
That phrase, dangerous dependency trap, that really hits home, doesn't it? It shows how we can kind of accidentally stifle the very growth we want,
Yeah.
by over-relying on, say, a few overworked leaders or always importing talent from outside
Yeah.
and completely overlooking the amazing potential that's, sitting right there in our own community.
Exactly. And the sources also make it really clear there's this huge opportunity here. And honestly, an absolute urgency to cultivate what they call Indigenous leaders. These are men and women who are deeply shaped by their local context, rooted in their community, and they're equipped for their roles with, real integrity.
And in today's world, things shift so fast culturally, you just can't afford to wait years for this to sort of happen by itself.
No, you can't. And thinking bigger, the Apostle Paul, he really got this urgency. Remember, he left Titus in Crete with that very clear instruction: appoint elders in every town. That's Titus 1.5. And that wasn't just like convenient delegation, it was strategic, vital for the mission.
Right. So here's the really good news in all this. Developing leaders isn't some super complex thing only for big institutions. Our sources show it can happen. It should happen. Right where you are. It's actually a pretty straightforward, intentional process. It weaves together biblical qualifications
Yeah, the character piece.
with hands-on apprenticeship and then clear commissioning. So
Right.
our mission in this deep dive is basically to offer you a framework, a way to spot that potential, and then a practical roadmap for training, for mentorship, and the tools to evaluate readiness. The goal really is to show how homegrown leadership, it doesn't just keep things going.
Wow.
It leads to exponential impact and incredible resilience.
Which brings us to a pretty deep question for you, the listener, to think
Right.
about what if? What if the biggest thing holding back your ministry's growth isn't, lack of money or programs or even vision, but it's the absence of a steady stream of well-prepared, biblically grounded leaders coming up from within your own congregation?
Yeah, just picture that for a second. The difference between, say, a church that's always looking outside its walls for leaders and one that consistently raises up skilled, faithful shepherds from its own people. It changes everything, doesn't it? Okay, so we've laid out this challenge, this dependency trap. Now let's anchor ourselves in a really fundamental truth. It's almost like you said, the scent of damp earth.
Okay.
True, lasting growth. It always comes from within. That's God's pattern.
It really is. In God's economy, leadership isn't like manufactured goods you import. It springs up from seeds the Creator himself has already sown right
Wow.
there in every community, every culture, every group of people. So the work really isn't about bringing something in that's missing. It's about recognizing and nurturing and empowering what God has already planted.
And looking at the sources, what jumps out is this incredibly consistent pattern in the Bible. From, Genesis right through to Revelation. God consistently calls people from within the context they're meant to serve. Think about Moses. He wasn't an outsider dropped in.
Yeah.
He grew up in Egypt's system before leading Israel out. His authority, his leadership, it was forged in closeness, in empathy. He understood his people's suffering because, he was one of them.
And David, same thing. He wasn't brought in from somewhere else, was he? A shepherd of Judah first. His authority was relational way before it became positional. But what really deepens this for me is Jesus himself. He entered history not as, some emperor from Rome, but as a Galilean carpenter's son, rooted in the dust, the dialect, the everyday life of his people. It's what the sources call the incarnational principle. Really powerful.
Yes, absolutely. And you see that principle flow right into Paul's strategy for planting churches. His consistent method: appoint local elders in each city. That way, leadership was both contextual, fitting the place,
Sustainable.
and sustainable, exactly, which avoids so many pitfalls you see with imported leadership.
It's such a contrast because, yeah, imported leadership often falls short. Why? Well, one big reason is just the cultural disconnect. It's profound. Leaders who don't share that local cultural lens, they really struggle to interpret scripture in ways that truly connect. And sometimes, without even realizing it, they end up imposing foreign structures or expectations.
Right, which can actually stifle the authentic ways God is already at work there.
Precisely. And it can stifle the unique expression of faith that belongs to that community.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And another big issue you mentioned is ownership.
Huge. A lack of ownership. Churches that always rely on outside leaders can easily slip into this consumer mindset,
Mm.
always looking outwards for vision, for direction, instead of taking real responsibility for their own mission.
And the sustainability piece you touched on earlier,
Yeah.
that feels critical too.
Absolutely critical. It creates fragile sustainability.
Yeah.
When the foreign leaders inevitably leave, well, the church can falter, even collapse, if strong indigenous leadership hasn't been intentionally developed. So the real biblical goal, for cross-cultural work, it isn't creating permanent dependency. Ephesians 4 tells us, doesn't it? It's about equipping the saints already there, essentially working ourselves out of a job.
Working ourselves out of a job.
Yeah. It's about being a gardener, not a manufacturer.
I like that. Gardener, not manufacturer. So if external leaders are gardeners then, their job is identifying those seeds, individuals whose faith, integrity, love mark them out, and then cultivating the right environment for them to grow. What does that actually demand?
Well, I think it demands three crucial things based on the sources. First, proximity. You have to walk alongside people long enough to really see potential emerge, not just on Sunday.
In everyday life.
In everyday life. Exactly. Second, patience. You have to let leadership develop organically. Real growth can't be rushed. And finally, permission. Creating that vital space, allowing local voices to genuinely shape the vision, the theology, the practice.
In their context.
In their context, yes.
Okay.
Not just importing models from somewhere else.
Okay, this brings us to that really compelling idea you mentioned, leadership development as spiritual horticulture. Let's really lean into this idea. Leadership development as spiritual horticulture.
Yeah.
Like a vineyard, right? It's alive, it breathes, it grows, it needs ongoing attention. A good vintner knows cultivating a vineyard, that's a long-term investment. It takes patient pruning, careful trellising, always watching the soil health. And the goal, as a source of stress, is rooted growth, deep roots, not just quick surface-level growth that fades.
That vineyard metaphor, it's so rich, and it really lays out the key stages. First, you've got preparing the soil. What does that mean? It means intentionally creating an environment where discipleship is just normal, where sound doctrine is valued, spiritual disciplines are encouraged, and servant leadership is modeled consistently.
Okay, soil prep first, then planting seeds. This is about spotting those people, isn't it? The ones with gifts, with a genuine heart to serve, even if their skills aren't, fully polished yet. You're looking for that potential.
That spark. Exactly. Not perfection right away. Then comes pruning for fruitfulness. And this is often the tough part. It means gently but firmly addressing character flaws, maybe refining theological understanding, guiding emerging leaders through times of humility, of testing. Like John 15 says, pruning helps bear more fruit.
Stripping away what holds back real fruitfulness. Makes sense.
And finally, there's training for resilience, equipping leaders so they can actually withstand trials. Cultural pressures, spiritual attacks, so they don't just wither, but they become deeply rooted.
It seems so clear then that the foundation, the absolute starting point, is the leader's character. Biblical leadership starts there, not with gifts, not charisma, character first.
Yeah.
The sources call them God's non-negotiables, right? From 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1. And that headline qualification, above reproach. It doesn't mean being perfect, does it?
No, not flawless. It means no formal, valid charge can stick. It speaks to a proven reputation, visible patterns of repentance when they do mess up, and just a real alignment between their life and their message. What you see is what you get.
And it makes sense that the home life is seen as the first flock, kind of a proving ground. Paul really emphasizes managing one's household well, 1 Timothy 3.
And that phrase, husband of one wife, mias konekos anar, it points to this deep, exclusive covenant faithfulness, a solid commitment to one's spouse. It's foundational. And when it talks about children are believers or are faithful, it suggests trustworthiness, obedience, signs of genuine faith reflecting the spiritual nurture happening at home.
One pairing that really jumped out at me from the sources was in 1 Timothy 3. Not a lover of money, but hospitable.
Ah, yes. Interesting pairing, isn't it?
It seems almost random at first, but it reveals so much about the heart's allegiance. Greed hoards, right? It blocks God's resources. But hospitality shares. It opens things up.
It's a test, really. Does a leader see resources and people as things to acquire or as opportunities to serve and bless?
Exactly. And of course, there are other key traits too.
Oh, absolutely. Self-control, that speaks to inner discipline. Humility, crucial for any servant leader, a genuine love for people which fuels the pastoral side. And sound doctrine, not just head knowledge,
Right.
but the wisdom to guide the church based on God's truth, not just cultural trends, keeping the foundation solid.
So all this focus on character and being rooted makes me wonder about that old debate. How are leaders best trained? Is it the academic route, seminaries? Or is it mainly on the job, apprenticeship style? What does the Bible actually lean towards?
Well, the sources are pretty clear that Jesus himself modeled this intense life-on-life apprenticeship. Think about his investment in the 12. Mark 3.14 says, "Being with him came before being sent by him." They learned theology, sure, but they learned it walking dusty roads in Galilee. Their identity, their resilience, it was shaped through real life, real encounters, not just classroom lectures.
Okay, so that's the apprenticeship model. But then you have Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus. Those feel like, well, leadership manuals, packed with doctrine, practical wisdom.
They are, so the biblical pattern really seems to combine both. It's not either. You could say apprenticeship shapes the being, the character, while formal training sharpens the understanding. And often, the sources suggest the apprenticeship part comes first, or at least alongside, building that foundation.
Right, being before doing. That makes sense.
Which leads to a really practical question. How do we actually know when someone is ready? Ready for leadership? And the key insight is, readiness isn't proven by ambition or wanting the role. It's proven by faithfulness under pressure.
Yeah.
It's about consistency when no one's watching. Faithfulness in prayer, in study, in serving, without needing the spotlight.
Like Moses' 40 years in the wilderness.
Yes.
Preparation time.
Exactly. Hidden preparation.
And it's also about fruit in relationships.
Yeah.
Right? Building unity, handling conflict well, actually caring for people effectively.
Yes. And another big one is teachability. Can they receive correction without getting defensive? Think of Apollos' brilliant guy, but he humbly received correction from Priscilla and Aquila. That's a mark of readiness. And finally, is their vision rooted in Scripture? Are they guiding people with God's agenda, not their own?
Which explains that warning in 1 Timothy 5. Do not be hasty in the laying on of hands.
So critical. Rushing someone into leadership before they're ready, it can set them up for massive discouragement or failure. It really calls for patience and discerning wisdom from current leaders.
Okay, so we've talked foundations, we've talked about the cultivation process.
Yeah.
Let's shift now to some really practical pathways and think about the long-term impact of developing leaders this way. The sources point to several effective models. First, there's mentorship-based apprenticeship. This really emphasizes that relational discipleship over just formal classes. Leaders learn by being with experienced mentors, watching, doing, hands-on.
Yeah, very powerful. Another great model is community-based theological training. So instead of sending potential leaders away, maybe for years, to a distant seminary, you bring the training to the local context. This could be through modular courses, maybe biblical storytelling, using oral methods if that fits the culture. It makes the learning relevant, accessible, and deeply contextual.
And the early church itself gives us a blueprint with shared leadership structures, doesn't it? That plurality of elders we see in Acts and Peter. It provides collective wisdom, shared load, accountability.
Right. It reduces that dependency on one single super leader, builds in resilience from the start.
Which leads right into the next point. Empowerment through responsibility.
Yes, this is crucial. Indigenous leaders need real authority. They need to make meaningful decisions. They can't just be permanent assistants. And yeah, there's a risk they might make mistakes, but real growth requires responsibility. It requires the chance to learn by doing.
So, boiling it down, what are some really practical steps churches, organizations can take? Like starting Monday. First, seems obvious maybe, but identify emerging leaders early. Pay attention to those folks serving faithfully without a title. Leadership often shows up long before it's named.
Good point. Second, invest holistically. Don't just train their minds with theology. Equip them in practical pastoral care, maybe community development skills, and definitely spiritual resilience. Nurture the whole person.
Third, and this takes faith, step back strategically, gradually, intentionally reduce the dependency, transfer real authority, resources, vision to the local leadership.
That's key. And fourth, celebrate local expression, encourage indigenous ways of worship, local preaching styles, ministry methods that genuinely reflect that community's culture, while always staying grounded biblically, of course. Let the gospel sing in their own voice.
That long-term vision.
Ah,
It's really profound, isn't it?
yeah.
A church standing strong on its own roots, the true measure of success, the real legacy. It's not what happens while the missionary or the founding pastor is there.
Yeah.
It's what endures, what multiplies after they leave. Paul could walk away from those churches he planted because he trusted them.
Yeah.
He entrusted them to local elders, and as Acts 20 says, to God and the word of his grace.
And when indigenous leaders are nurtured and empowered like that, the church just becomes incredibly resilient. It can handle external pressures, it can adapt to cultural shifts, and it multiplies organically from the inside out. This really is, if you step back, the Revelation 7.9 vision starting to take shape right now.
Yes, that picture. A huge crowd, every nation, tribe, people, language, all worshiping Christ, each in their own voice. Not just a carbon copy of other church culture, but a fully authentic, vibrant expression of God's kingdom in that place. The seed, as you said, is already there. God planted it. Our job is just to water it, protect it, make sure it grows deep roots, unshakable roots.
So let me leave you with this thought to chew on. If God really has already planted seeds of leadership in every single community, what does it reveal about our faith or maybe our lack of it when we default to importing leaders instead of intentionally cultivating the ones right under our noses?
Or, maybe put it another way, 50 years from now,
Yeah.
will your work be remembered more for the buildings you put up or for the leaders you faithfully raised up and left behind? We really hope you'll consider, concrete steps you can take. How can you identify, nurture, empower leaders right where you are? Or maybe just reconsider your own readiness based on what we've talked about. Our goal with this deep dive really was to empower you with knowledge for real, lasting impact.